Welcome to the Crawcast. I'm your host, George Krawczak, and this is what happened in Week 11 of the NFL season. And if you like this type of content, make sure to hit that subscribe button like it owes you money. So the first game was the Washington Commanders versus the Philadelphia Eagles. The Eagles won 26-18. The Eagles' leading passer is Jalen Hurts, who threw for 221 yards. Their leading rusher was Saquon Barkley, who rushed for 146 yards and 2 touchdowns. Their leading receiver was A.J. Brown, who had 65 receiving yards. And then for the Commanders, their leading passer was Jayden Daniels, who had 191 passing yards, 1 touchdown and interception. Their leading rusher was Brian Robinson, who had 63 rushing yards and a touchdown. And their leading receiver was Austin Ekeler, who had 89 receiving yards. So for this game, the Eagles just played really well. Jalen Hurts looked good, Saquon Barkley looked great, and Jayden Daniels really just didn't look good as a passer. He was missing a lot of wide open passes and just really wasn't on target. I think Quinyon Mitchell looks like an absolute stud, but I do think it was more Jayden Daniels playing bad versus him playing great, although he did play really great. And then Cooper DeJean is also looking good. I just think the Eagles had a really great draft class, and the Eagles are looking pretty good. And Saquon Barkley is looking really great in their system. And then for the Commanders, they didn't play well. Zach Ertz had an amazing final drive, but overall, they just really didn't play well. And they're still 7-4. They still are probably going to make the playoffs. And just overall, the Eagles played great. It was a great win by the Eagles. The next game was the Chicago Bears versus the Green Bay Packers. The Green Bay Packers won 20-19. The Packers' leading passer was Jordan Love, who threw for 261 yards, 1 touchdown and interception. Their leading rusher was Josh Jacobs, who rushed for 76 yards and a touchdown. And their leading receiver was Christian Watson, who had 150 receiving yards. And then for the Bears, their leading passer was Caleb Williams, who had 231 passing yards. Their leading rusher was DeAndre Swift, who had 71 rushing yards and a touchdown. And their leading receiver was Rome Odunze, who had 65 receiving yards. So about this game, this was an ugly game. The Packers really didn't play well. Their offense, I thought, played actually pretty well. Jordan Love had that one interception where it was just a horrible throw. And, here's the thing. It kind of shows a slight development in the sense where most of Jordan Love's, interceptions have been horrible decision-making, whereas this was just a horrible throw, but the Tucker Kraft was open. And then the Packers, I think they need to start panicking a little bit. Their defense, and especially the pass rush, is becoming a problem. Okay, Jair Alexander, he left the game early with an ankle injury. It's not going to be serious, but still, he's injured. Their corners really didn't play that well, and they really don't have that guy outside of Jair Alexander. And then their pass rush is abysmal. Rashawn Gary had a couple of nice plays, but overall didn't make a huge impact outside of a couple of plays. Lucas Van Ness did nothing. Devontae Wyatt did nothing. Kenny Clark did nothing. It's just inexplainable. This is not a playoff team. Okay, if they cannot fix their pass rushing issues, they're not going to beat the Lions. They're not going to beat the Vikings. They're not going to beat the Chiefs or Bills or whoever they face in the Super Bowl if they are lucky enough to make it. This is a major, major problem, and there's no real solutions, because if there's a guy out there that was good enough to be a star pass rusher, they're already on a team, and the trade deadline's passed. So this is just becoming a big, big issue for the Packers. And then Quay Walker, he needs to get benched, plain and simple. He has the mental aspect of the NFL down, but it's just on the complete reverse when it comes to the physical aspect. If you look at him, he puts himself in the correct position every single play. He is there to make the tackle or get a sack or get an interception. He is there. He just does the exact opposite. He misses the tackle. There was a really bad play where he should have sacked Caleb Williams and just didn't. When he does make the tackle, it's always 10, 15 yards downfield and he's getting bulldozed. He needs to go on the bench. Plain and simple. Just not good enough for this team. And I don't know if Isaiah McDuffie or, Hooper or Edgerrin Cooper or Tyrone Hopper or Edgerrin Cooper are much better, or Eric Wilson, but they cannot be worse than Quay Walker. It's time for him to sit on the bench. And then for the Bears, I think obviously you're disappointed in the loss. Okay, this is your Super Bowl. You need to beat the Packers. This is, they own you. They've owned you for the past 30 years, basically. I think it's the Packers are 51-15 against the Bears since Brett Favre took over as starting quarterback. But Caleb Williams did look good, And that's all I can say is he did look good, even though he wasn't pressured at all, and he did look good and outperform. So Caleb Williams does look like he can be a future quarterback for the Bears and did have a good performance. The next game is the Detroit Lions versus the Jacksonville Jaguars. The Lions won 52-6. The Lions' leading passer was Jared Goff, who had 412 yards and 4 touchdowns. Their leading rusher was David Montgomery, who had 75 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns. And their leading receiver was Amon-Ra St. Brown, who had 161 yards and 2 touchdowns. And for the Jaguars, their leading passer was Mac Jones, who had 138 yards and an interception. Their leading rusher was Travis Etienne, who had 27 rushing yards. And their leading receiver was Brian Thomas Jr., who had 82 receiving yards. Going into this game, the Detroit Lions had the second best record in the NFL, and the Jaguars had the worst record in the NFL. And it showed. The Jaguars looked abysmal, and the Lions looked great, and they should have, giving how big of a difference these two teams are playing. Plus, Mac Jones is the starting quarterback for the Jaguars. I don't really know what more to say about this game in the sense that Detroit just looks really, really great. Their pass rush is still a little bit of concern, even though Zadarius Smith did get a sack, although that was on a blitz, so it wasn't really a four-man rush sack, but he did get a sack. And just overall, it's hard to count this game for the Lions in the sense that the Jaguars are so terrible that it feels like they make a lot of teams look really good. And so the Lions, they just played up to expectations and didn't play down to expectations. That's the best you can ask for the Lions. But I think the Lions are definitely the juggernaut of probably the NFL, honestly. Their defense still concerns me quite a bit. I think, maybe comparing them to the other top teams, I think maybe Buffalo's defense is better. But in terms of offense, I think it's clear they have the number one offense in the NFL. And so the Lions are definitely on the right track, and it's going to be curious, again, if Ben Johnson wants a head coaching job or not. And then for the Jaguars, I'm curious if Doug Peterson is going to get fired. I don't know, because what was it, 2 years ago? No, it was last year. They made the playoffs and definitely overperformed expectations with Trevor Lawrence. And then this year, they've been dealing with injuries. They've been dealing with just being on the wrong side of one-score games. It's just overall just been a terrible year for the Jaguars, and I don't know if he's going to get fired or not, and that's just we'll have to see, because I feel like there's a case to keep him and there's a case to fire him, and it's just a tough decision that the Jaguars have to make. The next game is the Indianapolis Colts versus the New York Jets. The Colts won 28-27. The Colts' leading passer was Anthony Richardson, who had 272 yards and a touchdown. Their leading rusher was Jonathan Taylor, who had 57 rushing yards. And their leading receiver was Josh Downs, who had 84 receiving yards and a touchdown. And for the Jets, their leading passer was Aaron Rodgers, who had 184 yards and 2 touchdowns. Their leading rusher was Breece Hall, who had 78 rushing yards and a touchdown. And their leading receiver was Davante Adams, who had 72 receiving yards. So for this game, Anthony Richardson looked great. This was probably the first game of the year where Anthony Richardson really looked like an actual capable, good NFL quarterback. And I don't know if it was just the benching, the game plan. Also, it could be the Jets defense because the Jets defense is really falling apart. But Anthony Richardson really looked great, and he deserves a lot of credit for it. And he's kind of proved that, I'm not saying he is, because I think it's too early to either give up on him or anoint him the future of the franchise. But he's definitely moving in the correct direction for being the future of the franchise. And then the Jets, it's hard to say what else is. To win, or to make the playoffs, they basically need to go 6-0 in their remaining games, which is impossible. Oh, I don't think they have any shot at doing it. And there's just nothing else to say. Defense is bad. Offense is slow to get going. They did come back in the second half and start playing better, but again, the offense is just slow, and I'm just very curious what they're going to do with Aaron Rodgers. Like, do they want to completely throw out everything and cut Aaron Rodgers or trade him? Or are they going to try to go another year and maybe with a new coaching staff they can clean up this roster? It's just tough because the Jets are majorly the biggest disappointment of the year, and there's no real solutions to fixing it. And so I just don't know what they're going to do. The next game is the Miami Dolphins versus the Las Vegas Raiders. The Dolphins won 34-19. The Dolphins' leading passer was Tua, who had 288 yards and 3 touchdowns. Their leading rusher was Devon Achane, who had 73 rushing yards and a touchdown. And their leading receiver was Jonnu Smith, who had 101 receiving yards and 2 touchdowns. And for the Raiders, their leading passer was Gardner Minshew, who had 282 yards, touchdown or 2 touchdowns and an interception. Their leading rusher is Jakobi Meyers, who had 20 rushing yards, and their leading receiver is Brock Bowers, who had 126 receiving yards and a touchdown. So for this game, it just kind of makes you sad what the Dolphins turned into, because they're not out of the playoffs yet, because effectively in their remaining 7 games, they kind of need to go 5-2, which is not impossible, but it's going to be difficult. And it just shows like they are a good team, and they could have been a playoff team, and would have been a playoff team if Tua didn't get injured. And granted, they are beating up on terrible teams, but they are a good team, and that's all to say about it. They are a good team. And then with the Raiders, they're struggling a lot. Like, they have 0 running game, and that just really kills you, because you need to threaten the run to to bring the safeties up and bring the linebackers up, and then basically be able to throw it over the top. You can't do that with no run game. Brock Bowers on the bright side looks like an absolute stud and looks really, really great, even though he's not going to win Offensive Rookie of the Year, because that's kind of already been anointed to Jaden Daniels. I think Brock Bowers at least needs to be semi in the consideration. And just overall, the Raiders are bad. I think they need to fire Antonio Pierce. I get it that the locker room likes him, which is a very important part of a coach, but I just don't think he's that good of a coach. And just overall, the Raiders are a mess, and we'll see what Tom Brady, being the new owner, can do if they hire Bill Belichick or what goes on with them. The next game is the Los Angeles Rams versus the New England Patriots. The Los Angeles Rams won 28-22. The Rams' leading passer is Matthew Stafford, who had 295 yards and 4 touchdowns. Their leading rusher is Kyren Williams, who had 86 rushing yards. And their leading receiver was Puka Nacua, who had 123 receiving yards and a touchdown. And then for the Patriots, their leading passer is Drake May, who had 282 passing yards, 2 touchdowns, and an interception. Their leading rusher is Ramondre Stevenson, who had 73 rushing yards. And their leading receiver was Kendrick Bourne, who had 70 receiving yards and a touchdown. So for this game, both teams actually looked fairly decent. The Rams looked really good, although their defense struggled quite a bit at the beginning. And then the Patriots, I think they're kind of getting the best of both worlds, in the sense that Drake May is actually looking really good. And I give more props to him, because of all the rookie quarterbacks like Caleb Williams, Jaden Daniels, Bo Nix, I think Drake May is definitely in the worst situation out of all of them. And he's played well. And I think it's good for them, because he's playing well and they're losing. So he's looking like he is the franchise guy, and they're going to get a high draft pick for next year. And then the Rams, they keep on winning and playing well. Kyren Williams looked good. Puka Nacua, Cooper Kupp played well. Stafford played well. And they're really trying to make the playoffs. And I think they can do it. They need to be about 4-3 to make the playoffs. Although this one's a little bit tougher, because generally speaking, you need to be about 9-8 to make the playoffs. But the NFC is such a good conference that it's going to be tough. You're probably going to need to be better than 9-8 to make the playoffs. The next game is the New Orleans Saints versus the Cleveland Browns. The Saints won 35-14. The Saints' leading passer was Derek Carr, who had 248 yards and 2 touchdowns. Their leading rusher was Taysom Hill, who had 138 rushing yards and 3 touchdowns. And their leading receiver was Marquez Valdes-Scantling, who had 87 receiving yards and a touchdown. And then for the Browns, their leading passer is Jameis Winston, who had 395 yards and 2 touchdowns. Their leading rusher is Nick Chubb, who had 50 rushing yards. And their leading receiver is Jerry Jeudy, who had 142 receiving yards and a touchdown. So for this game, the Browns played okay. I didn't think they played that bad as the record would show, but their rushing defense, and their defense as a whole, has just been playing horrible. And then the Saints, this is kind of how I felt about the Dolphins, how I feel about the Saints, is they are playing well, and their defense has been playing well, and their offense has been playing well. Just imagine how they'd look if Derek Carr never got injured. Like, they would legitimately be a playoff team if Derek Carr never got injured. And then Taysom Hill, like, it's so tough to get him in fantasy, because he's taking up a quarterback or tight end spot, but man, he is just electric. He's really, really good, and just dominating. I can't explain it. He's on the older side. I think he's 30 or maybe he's 31, and he's just playing really, really great. And then Marquez Valdes-Scantling, this is what I always said about him, and that's why I was surprised he wasn't on a team for a while, is he's basically a speedy deep threat. He does struggle with drops and catching the ball, but he is a deep threat. He is 6'4", and just let him run, let him just beat the defensive coverage. And that's why it shocked me what was on a team for so long, but now he's playing well. The next game is the Pittsburgh Steelers versus the Baltimore Ravens. The Steelers won 18-16. The Steelers' leading passer was Russell Wilson, who had 205 yards and an interception. Their leading rusher was Najee Harris, who had 63 rushing yards. And their leading receiver was George Pickens, who had 89 receiving yards. And then the Ravens' leading passer was Lamar Jackson, who had 207 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. Their leading rusher was Derrick Henry, who had 65 rushing yards and a touchdown. Their leading receiver was Isaiah Likely, who had 75 receiving yards. So this game, I just want to say, it's amazing how the Steelers didn't score a single touchdown against the Ravens and beat them, whereas the Bengals scored 9 touchdowns in the 2 games against the Ravens and could not beat them. But the Steelers' defense is really great, one of the best defenses in the league. Their offense just needs to play better, plain and simple. And they really just shut down the Ravens, it felt like. And the Ravens' defense is not that great, and so if their offense can't be a super juggernaut, they kind of falter quite a bit. And just overall, great game. Justin Tucker, he's becoming an issue. I don't know what's wrong with him. I saw every single one of his missed kicks has been wide left, but he's just not good anymore, and I can't explain it. He's always been probably the best kicker in NFL history, like certainly for the, other than like the last 2 years and especially this year, but he's not making them anymore, and I can't explain it because sometimes it is the long snapper or the holder, but this time it's just him, and he just needs to improve, and there's no other way about it. So if you're the Steelers, you gotta be happy because you're still up in the division and you beat the Ravens. But the Ravens really got to work on their kicking issues, and that's been an issue for many teams this season. The next game is the Minnesota Vikings versus the Tennessee Titans. The Vikings won 23-13. The Vikings' leading passer was Sam Darnold, who had 246 yards and 2 touchdowns. Their leading rusher was Aaron Jones, who had 39 rushing yards. And their leading receiver is Justin Jefferson, who had 81 receiving yards. And then for the Titans, their leading passer was Will Levis, who had 295 yards, 1 touchdown, interception. Their leading rusher was Will Levis, who had 18 rushing yards. And their leading receiver was Nick Westbrook, who had 117 receiving yards and a touchdown. So for this game, I thought both teams kind of played fine. Like, neither of them played that great. The Vikings' defense is still really good. And I thought, the Titans played well. Will Levis played well. Sam Darnold played well. And that's kind of it. The Titans had 0 run game, which was really unfortunate. And I do think it is too early to give up on Will Levis if the Titans are considering it. I think he's played well enough that he's at least earned another year, and you shouldn't give up on him after, just year 2 out of his 4 to 5 year contract, depending on the 5th year option. And I think they should keep him because he has played well enough to prove he can be a starting starting quarterback. He just needs to be a little bit more consistent. But overall, I think both teams are going to be happy, and it's just insane how well the NFC North is playing with the Lions at 9-1, Vikings at 8-2, and the Packers at 7-3. Like, if you look at a lot of those records, those lead almost all the divisions, and they're all just in one division. The next game is the Seattle Seahawks versus the San Francisco 49ers. The Seahawks won 20-17. The Seahawks' leading passer was Geno Smith, who had 221 yards and an interception. The leading rusher was Kenneth Walker, who had 54 rushing yards and a touchdown. And their leading receiver was Jackson Smith-Njigba, who had 110 receiving yards. And for the 49ers, their leading passer was Brock Purdy, who had 159 passing yards, a touchdown, and interception. Their leading rusher was Christian McCaffrey, who had 79 receiving yards. And their leading rusher was and their leading receiver was Jauan Jennings, who had 91 receiving yards and a touchdown. So for this game, Geno Smith actually played pretty decent, and Jackson Smith-Njigba looked really, really great. Honestly, he's getting to the point where he's clearly the number 2 to DK Metcalf, and might be even battling him for number 1, but he's clearly at least the number 2. He overtook Tyler Lockett. And then for the 49ers, they're just becoming a problem. They're way too injured. Nick Bosa went down again, and it looked like a semi-serious injury. And it felt like Nick Bosa and the defensive line was really attacking Geno Smith the entire game. And then once Nick Bosa went down, the defensive line just struggled and did nothing. And so they're both 5-5, and luckily they're still, in their division, can win their division. But just overall, the 49ers are way too injured. And then the Seahawks team, I'm just not a huge fan of them. I don't think Geno Smith is necessarily the guy, even though he has been playing better. And I don't think they are a playoff caliber team with their defense as well. The next game is the Denver Broncos versus the Atlanta Falcons. The Broncos won 38-6. The Broncos' leading passer is Bo Nix, who had 307 yards and 4 touchdowns. Their leading rusher was Javonte Williams, who had 59 rushing yards and a touchdown. And their leading receiver was Courtland Sutton, who had 78 receiving yards. And then for the Falcons, their leading passer was Kirk Cousins, who had 173 yards and an interception. Their leading rusher was Bijan Robinson, who had 35 rushing yards. And their leading receiver was Drake London, who had 61 receiving yards. So this game is the tale of the two defenses, honestly. Well, and the Broncos offense. The Falcons defense just collapsed and were absolutely terrible. And then the Broncos defense has been really playing great. They've been great this entire season and just overall has been one of the best defenses in the NFL. And then in this game, Bo Nix just played great. I think he's been pretty good in the season. That's why I felt like it should be at least a debate between on Bo Nix or Caleb Williams, who's been the better rookie quarterback, because I think overall, Caleb Williams has had better or worse games, but Bo Nix has just been kind of average, whereas this was just a really, really great game by Bo Nix. And I don't know how far the Broncos will make the playoffs, but I definitely think they are a playoff team and can do very well, although I don't think they're a Super Bowl contender yet. The next game is the Buffalo Bills versus the Kansas City Chiefs. The Bills won 30-21. The Bills' leading passer was Josh Allen, who threw for 262 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. Their leading rusher was Josh Allen, who had 55 rushing yards and a touchdown. And their leading receiver was Khalil Shakir, who had 70 receiving yards. And for the Chiefs, their leading passer was Patrick Mahomes, who had 196 passing yards, 3 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions. Their leading rusher was Kareem Hunt, who had 60 rushing yards. And their leading receiver is Xavier Worthy, who had 61 receiving yards and a touchdown. So in this game, the Bills' defense played great, but also I just think Patrick Mahomes is becoming a problem in the sense that he keeps throwing way too many interceptions. I think the interceptions are a problem for Jordan Love, and they're also a problem for Patrick Mahomes. No one's talking about it just because the Chiefs somehow keep barely winning, and so it feels like Patrick Mahomes really hasn't cost them any games, but he's becoming a problem and just not taking care of the ball at all whatsoever. And with the Bills, they are just playing really well, and I think they are probably the best team in the AFC. And their defense is looking great. Their offense is looking really good, although the run game struggled quite a bit today, even though the Chiefs have a great defense. And just overall, Buffalo, I think they are better than Kansas City by far. And it's just going to be very interesting how this works, because I think it is certainly possible that these two teams will meet in the playoffs. Both of them are going to be playoff contenders. And it's just going to be interesting how that goes. The next game is the Los Angeles Chargers versus the Cincinnati Bengals. The Chargers won 34-27. The Chargers' leading passer was Justin Herbert, who had 297 yards and 2 touchdowns. Their leading rusher was Justin Herbert, who had 65 rushing yards. Their leading receiver was Ladd McConkey, who had 123 receiving yards. And for the Bengals, their leading passer was Joe Burrow, who had 356 yards and 3 touchdowns. Their leading rusher was Chase Brown, who had 86 rushing yards. And their leading receiver was T. Higgins, who had 148 receiving yards and a touchdown. So in this game, it feels like the Bengals should have won, in the sense that right at the end, it felt like both teams were trying to blow it, and just the Bengals with their kicking issues, again, Evan McPherson, just like Justin Tucker, has been struggling quite a lot, but the Chargers got a good, tough win, and it's tough for the Bengals, because they basically need to be 5-2 for the remainder of the season, and that's going to be hard, and I feel bad for them, because they are a good team, and Joe Burrow is playing like an MVP candidate. I'd argue he's probably a top 3 quarterback in the NFL right now, but no one cares because they keep on losing. And to me, that's why it's always like Super Bowls and wins shouldn't really be a quarterback stat, because Joe Burrow has been playing great. I don't think you can argue he's been playing bad, and they just keep on losing because of the defense and the special teams, and not because of him. And then the Chargers, they just got a great win. Herbert looked decent, although he should have thrown he was weird. He had an amazing first half of the game, and then the second half, he just kind of came out and collapsed and just really didn't play well in the second half. But overall, you got to be happy if you're the Chargers, because you have a great record, and you're going to make the playoffs, and anything can happen in the playoffs. And then the Bengals, they just need to start winning more, plain and simple. It's hard to explain other than that. And then the final game of the week was the Houston Texans versus the Dallas Cowboys. The Texans won 34-10. The Texans' leading passer is C.J. Stroud, who had 257 yards and an interception. Their leading rusher was Joe Mixon, who had 109 rushing yards and 3 touchdowns. And their leading receiver was Nico Collins, and Tank Dell, who both had 54 receiving yards. And for the Cowboys, their leading passer was Cooper Rush, who had 354 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. Their leading rusher was Rico Dowdle, who had 28 rushing yards. And their leading receiver was CeeDee Lamb, who had 93 receiving yards. So in this game, the Cowboys are kind of collapsing. They have 0 run game, and I think that's really screwed them over. Because if you can't run the ball, they're basically like, okay, we'll let Cooper Rush pass on you. And Cooper Rush is not that great as a passer. And just I don't know if they'll fire Mike McCarthy. Mike McCarthy's been a good coach, but they've just been struggling with injuries. With Micah Parsons, I know he's back, but he's been missing games. DeMarcus Lawrence still isn't back. Dak Prescott's done for the year. Just, they've been struggling with injuries and have had 0 run game, and that's really been the worst part about them. And then the Texans, you finally break your losing streak, and you finally stop kind of the collapse that you've been having. Although the Texans did beat a terrible Cowboys team. But overall, you gotta be happy if you're the Cowboys or if you're the Texans because you finally are doing something. Other than that, it's the Cowboys. So let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you like this type of content, make sure to hit that subscribe button like it owes you money, and I'll see you on the next one.